This lesson is 8.3 for Algebra 1B. In 8.3, we are not using our journal. We are using a separate note page, basically because we need the extra space. Okay, in 8.3, we're going to be doing a couple things. The first thing, we're going to be graphing quadratics that are in this form, ax squared plus bx equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And then we're also going to find the minimum and maximum values of our function. So there's some kind of cool things when we're in this form. An example, by the way, of this form would be your example right down here. So remember, a, b, and c are the coefficients of your variables. Then c is the constant hanging off the end. You'll notice something kind of cool here. The c value is always going to be your y-intercept, where your graph intersects the y-axis. We can find our axis of symmetry just using our a, b, and c and this formula. So this is an important formula that you're going to need to remember, but you're going to use it so much you're going to have it remembered. And that also is going to be the x portion of our vertex, which makes sense because the axis of symmetry goes right through our vertex. So the x's from our vertex and our axis of symmetry always match. So let's give it a go here. First thing you want to remember is f of x is the same as y. If you just want to change that to a y, it's not a bad idea. And then identify your a, b, and c. You're used to doing this from chapter 7 when we were factoring. So a, b, and c. So what I can do now is I can kind of ignore my equation and just pay attention to my a, b, and c. I'm going to find my axis of symmetry and half of my vertex using this formula. So x equals negative b. I like to hop that negative right up and put it next to the b. In this case, my b is 6. Get in the habit of putting your b in parentheses, though, because when your b is negative, you're going to want to make sure you do a negative here. And then 2, a is 3. So when I simplify this, I get negative 6 over 6, or negative 1. So half of my vertex is negative 1. My axis of symmetry is x equals negative 1. I already found 2 pieces of my list down here. Y-intercept I also know, because up here in our notes it said y-intercept is c. C is 2, so my y-intercept is 2. Remember, y-intercept is on the y-axis, so the y is 2, the x is always going to be 0 for the y-intercept, sorry. We can do domain and range right now also, because domain is always all real numbers for quadratic functions. And range, we know range is our y values. We know a couple of things. A is positive, so we know this graph is upward facing. And we know that the vertex will be at the bottom. Ooh, we need the y portion of our vertex to find our range. All right, let's do that then. So this gives you a hint. If we substitute x equals negative 1 into f of x, we find the y coordinate of our vertex. So here's our equation. I'm going to copy it down here. Y equals 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. What I want to do, though, is substitute or replace x with negative 1. And that's going to tell me what the y value is when x is negative 1. This is where your parentheses become important. You want to make sure you wrap up that x value in parentheses. And then if you do, you can let your calculator do the work for you here. I can punch this whole line in. 3, left parenthesis, negative 1, right parenthesis, squared, plus 6, parenthesis, negative 1, parenthesis, plus 2, equals negative 1. Let me squeeze this in here. So y equals negative 1. So when x is -1, y is -1. There's my vertex. I can now figure out my domain. Domain, y on the left, -1 on the right. I just have to put my inequality in here. Well, if my graph is upward facing and my vertex is -1, -1, then all of my y values are going to be above y equals -1 or greater than or equal to -1. Now we're going to do something else different. In section 8.1 and 8.2, we always put -2, -1, 0, 1, 2 here. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to put our vertex right smack dab in the middle of our table of values, because our vertex is always right smack dab in the middle of our parabola. So we want to find some other points on either side of our parabola. So here I am at -1. I want to choose the two x's to the right of -1, which would be 0 and +1, and two x's to the left of -1, which would be -2 and -3. Okay, so now I need to figure out these y values that go with x equals -3, -2, 0, and 1. Now remember, we're substituting in -3 into the equation here, just like we did here, where we substituted in -1. The great part is I still have that in my calculator from when I substituted in -1. So if I use my arrow keys, I want to change this -1 to a -3. So there we go, change that one, and then the +2 hanging off the end, so I'm good, and I get 11. Okay, now let's find out what does y equal when x is -2. So I'm going to change the -2 to a -3. Oh, shoot. Okay, did not mean to do that. I hit clear instead of hitting my arrows. Well, let me show you how you type it in from the beginning. So I'd have 3 parenthesis -2 right parenthesis squared plus 6 parenthesis -2 right parenthesis plus 2. That didn't take that long, and I get 2. Okay, now what happens when x is 0? Let's make sure I'm going to delete that negative, x is 0. Delete that negative, x is 0. Hit enter. I get 2. When x is 1, 1 goes there, 1 goes there, and I get 11. Now remember, these parabolas are isometrical, so these y values match and these y values match. So I really didn't even need to put these in the calculator because I know I'm symmetrical on either side of my vertex or axis of symmetry. Let's do our graph now. Graph your vertex first, over -1, down -1. Start to picture. A is positive, so this graph is upward facing. This is going to be the lowest point on my graph. Okay, over -2, up 2. Over -3, up 11. I'm going to add that coordinate point right there. Now I'm going to draw in my axis of symmetry. So draw that dashed line that goes right through your vertex. And remember, these are symmetrical. So when I plot these 2 points, I bet you this point is going to end up right here. So let's see, over 0, up 2. So this point is 1 to the right of my axis of symmetry. This point is 1 to the left because I'm symmetrical. How about over 1, up 11? That's right here. 2 to the right of my axis of symmetry. And this one was 2 to the left. So that symmetry makes the graphing easier. Attach your coordinate points with a nice smooth curve, no sharp corners, arrows on the end. All right, let's look at another one. Turn over. Step 1, you're going to want to identify your A, B, and C. So A is -3. B is -6. What is C? It's a 0. If you don't see it, it's a 0. Okay. Plug into your formula to find your axis of symmetry and half of your vertex. So I'm going to have, I like to hop this negative up, negative b. b is -6. So make sure this negative is from your formula and this -6 is from your a, b, and c. On the bottom, 2 times a is negative. So you got a lot of negatives going on in this one. If you need to, use your calculator for these. But I'm going to say a negative times a negative is a positive. So I get +6 in my numerator. Positive times a negative is a negative. 2 times 3 is 6. -6 in my denominator. 6 divided by -6 is -1. So I get x equals -1 again. That's just coincidence. You won't always get x equals -1. So half of my vertex is -1, and my axis of symmetry is x equals -1. So I could go over here and draw my axis of symmetry right now. It's the vertical line that passes through x equals -1. Okay, let's find the other half of my vertex. My graph, I know, because a is negative, is going to be downward facing. So I know it's downward facing. I know the middle of it is on this line. I just don't know how high up or how high down it is. So I like to write that as a y. I also like to copy my equation and put the x in parentheses. And what am I going to do? I'm going to substitute in -1 wherever there's an x. So y equals -3, parenthesis, -1 squared, minus 6, parenthesis, -1. So let's put that in our calculator. So I have -3. Be careful with this one. You have a lot of negatives. -3, parenthesis, -1, squared, minus 6, left parenthesis, -1, squared, equals 3. So when x is -1, y is 3. So there's my vertex. I'm going to graph it right now. Over -1, up 1, 2, 3. This is going to be the top of my parabola because it's downward facing. Let's do our y-intercept. Remember, your y-intercept is always c. That's the easiest one to find. So y-intercept is 0. When I'm putting a point on the y-axis, actually, we could graph this right now. Y-intercept is where my parabola will cross the y-axis. It's going to cross it at y equals 0. So that coordinate point is 0, 0. The axis or the y-intercept always has an x value of 0, just like they show you in this diagram. So I already have 2 points on my parabola. Now, again, put your vertex right in the middle of your graph. -1 plus 1 is 0, plus another 1 is 1. -1 minus 1 is -2. Minus, again, is -3. Again, I want to pick x values on either side of my axis of symmetry right here. And if I still have my function in my calculator from when I substituted in x equals -1, I'm just going to go up and change this to x equals -3. And then go over, replace the -1 with a -3, and hit enter, and I get -9. So I'm not going to show all those calculator steps, otherwise this video will get too long. I'm going to fill these in, but make sure you know you will need to do that on your own. Again, notice the symmetry here. That's always going to be true. So let's finish our graph. So -3, -9, -2, 0, -1 up 3, I already graphed that, that's my vertex. 0, 0, look again, that's my y-intercept, over 1, down -9. So this point, we had it already graphed because we figured out it was our y-intercept. It also ended up to be in our table of values. Now, Connect your coordinate points with a nice smooth curve. No sharp corners. Arrows at the end. Domain and range. Domain is always going to be all real numbers because this graph goes to the right and to the left forever. Range, I have y. The top of my parabola is at, go over to the y-axis, it's at y is 3, which makes sense. That's the y portion of our vertex. So now I just need to put an inequality in here. Well, if you look at this, my graph, the top of it is at y equals 3. The rest of it is less than 3. So the y values must be less than or equal to 3. This one is for you to try. So pause the video and try that one. And I trusted you. You tried it, right? You need to know how to do these from the beginning to end all by yourself. This should be what you have. Make sure, a couple of things you want to check. Vertex is a coordinate point. Make sure it's in parentheses. Axis of symmetry is a line. Make sure you write the equation, x equals -2. If you just have 2, that's wrong. 2 is a number, x equals -2 is a line. Y-intercept, it's okay to have just a -1 there. Okay, so check that out, make sure you're good. Yep, we'll do this next part in a separate video.